got the question I sent you earlier, right?
Oh yeah, dealing with hate online or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's just kind of like, I don't know, because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have, so I'm just trying to kind of like wrestle with this question, right? Because it's more about figuring out how to be able to take criticism in a constructive way when there's a lot of people who will give you criticism or like the veneer of criticism when they're actively just trying to harm you, right? So like, and I suspect that this probably isn't like what you get, but I don't know what kind of comments you get on your videos.
All
But
sorts of
like for
comments.
me, I bet. But like for me, I like it when I get like comments that are like sort of constructive, like even if I f up or whatever, like I'll read through them. Like I want to see what people are saying about me, for better or for worse. But then, like I read through comments on like, like I put up a video on Stone Toss like forever ago, and I still get comments like 41% or go kill yourself or whatever on there, like tons and tons of time. And like I just have to, and I know that I shouldn't dwell on it and I shouldn't like spend a whole lot of time on it, but like I still have to like go through, like the way that the YouTube app works, like from your feed, it still occupies like a decent amount of your feed, so you just have to comb through all that shit to be able to get to like um actually decent feedback. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out like what are mentally healthy ways to kind of deal with that, and like what you've done to try and like, because otherwise I feel like I'm just going to go insane. Like I've just been very disincentivized from reading comments and feedback that people give me, because I know that each time I do it, I basically have to subject myself to reading half hate comments and then anything else that's left over.
So I think I don't think there is a way to do that other than having somebody else go through it for you. I think that I talk about this phenomenon a lot, and a lot of other content creators seem to agree. I think as people, you can read like a ton of stuff. You can read like 100 good comments, but if you read one like really bad comment, those seem to be the ones that stick with us the most for whatever reason.
Yep. Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that if you're getting a lot of a particular type of comment, even if it's toxic, there's usually, it's a referring to something. So that can be good to like understand. So like if I get like a million people, calling me like a whiny F slur or some shit or whatever after a conversation, like maybe I come off as too like complaining or something. I don't know. Like there might be something that's like worth like looking into, like, oh, like I wonder why people have like this particular type of feedback. But in general, yeah, it's going to be really hard to extract like valuable criticism from like the shitheads online. I'm ready for you to summon this boss when you're in, by the way.
Yeah, do you think most people have like actual feedback that you care about, like Steve?
When there's like a ton of people that say the same thing. Okay, this is all I'm gonna say. I'm trying to say this. When there's a bunch of consistent comments saying the same thing, it's referring to something. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or good, but there's a reference to something, right? So like, and trying to tease out what that is can be really hard, because oftentimes it's hard to get other people to do it because they're not in the same position as you, and everybody, it can be really, really, really biased. So it requires like an insane amount of like introspection and kind of like honesty with yourself, which is like it's to an inhuman level. So like if I see like a ton of comments that say like, you hear something that I get a lot actually. A lot of people say that like I talk over people a lot. This is a really interesting comment for me to deal with, because I don't. And I've watched a ton of my own conversations, and I'm aware of a ton of my own conversations, and I don't think that I do. I just don't. I'll listen through, I'll see who interrupts me more. People have tallied up who interrupts me more. But just because I don't doesn't mean that the comments are totally worthless. That must be referring to something. There is some reference there, right? And I think it's a combination of the fact that I talk kind of quickly, and I do cut people up sometimes. It does happen. It's not like I never do it. But I think the combination of the fact that I speak quickly and then I do cut people off occasionally might give the impression that I'm constantly cutting people off, right? So that's what I say when I mean, like, there might be some piece of criticism. There might be some piece of criticism that pops up over and over again. That criticism might not necessarily be correct, but it's probably referring to something if a lot of people keep bringing it up over and over again, if that makes sense, right?
Sure.
Yeah, no, and I guess that makes sense. So I think this connects to, let me explain kind of like the way that I've been going through this, because I want to see if this is like a reasonably healthy way to manage this. Because I think that this can apply to kind of what you're saying, or it might be able to apply, I don't know. So usually the way that I try to focus on like sifting through these comments is just trying to like mentally categorize, like, because the goal at the end of the day for what I do, or at least what I try to engage in, is like trying to reach people, right? But I also am able to understand that like there's no way I'm going to be able to reach every single person. Some people will stop at the door for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of the position I hold, maybe it's because I'm trans or whatever. Like there are some people who would just like mentally check out. So usually I try to try to frame it as like reaching every reasonable person,
Sure.
as opposed to every unreasonable person. Like if there are some people who are just unreasonable, where it's no combination, or the way that I categorize it right now in my head, the way that I think about it is like, no matter what combination of words I ever string together or how I present them, there are some people who might never.
Yeah,
be
for a variety of
convinced by me.
reasons.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. And so like that's how I normally go through. Like anyone who comments on my videos, at the way I'm processing this right now, like if anyone comments like 41%, you know, like basically saying like, oh, go kill yourself or whatever, I'm like, oh, like the way that I handle that right now is kind of like, okay, that's someone who clearly, you know, wasn't really interested in listening to me to begin with, so I really don't care. They're just interested in harming me. But then like there's this ethical question that I've been grappling with recently, right? Because I'm thinking a lot in terms of like accountability has kind of been like this thing that's been on my mind, and like this idea of like, okay, so if there are people in your community, or if there's like people in other communities who are incredibly toxic, who we might label as unreasonable, then like let's assume that those people are already there to begin with. Like what's the way to deal with them? Because if we follow kind of the logic that I already have to begin with, then the logic would just be like, oh, excise them from the community, like just straight axe, cut them out, right? Which
Yeah,
is
I
a way
mean,
to
it depends on like what your tolerance is. Like at this point for me, sometimes people will have like okay-ish criticisms, but they phrase it in such a toxic way. I usually just permaban them. Because if I can tell that somebody's never going to be able to engage in a healthy way, it's too irritating for me, and I'll just get rid of them. So like here's a good example, right? So I've been talking about like some of this like Hamas and Israel stuff recently, right? So if somebody posts something on my subreddit, like somebody could post something like this. I disagree with Destiny's take on Hamas and Israel. I don't think that Destiny is giving a fair overview of everything that the Palestinians have suffered through, the fact that they've been the victims of, you know, these types of occupations that Israel's done, that even international communities are blah, blah, blah. Like, that would be like a post somebody could make. It's like they disagree with me, they state why they think I'm wrong, and then they give an explanation, and like, yeah, that's okay. I'm cool with that. Another type of criticism that might be the same type, or it might be the same criticism, but delivered way differently, might be Destiny is so fucking angry at lefties. He's so fucking blind to his own biases. He can't see that Hamas has legitimate reason for being upset. He's such a fucking moron, and he's so obsessed with dunking on people like Vosh. He's totally ignoring the outcomes of the 6-day war. He's totally fucking ignoring that the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, they're kind of like, they're delivering like criticisms of like, yeah, these are like decent points, but it's so fucking toxic. It's like, I just don't care. I just permaban instantly people like that. Because like the problem with those types of people is that type of mentality and attitude is infectious, and it festers, and it empowers and emboldens like other people that won't have legitimate criticisms towards you. And you can usually get like all of those legitimate criticisms from like people that are like a little bit less socially unaware in terms of like how they phrase things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that makes sense. Because that seems to be pretty like reasonably close to how I usually like parse through it, right? Like I'm, you know, like if anyone like gives me a comment in a video or like in my Discord or whatever, and they're usually like, you know, they phrase it in a way where it's clear that they're not trying to attack me personally, but they're just trying to raise an issue with something I've said before, then like that's fine. Usually I'll just like, it's usually an issue when it's clear that they're just trying to like harm me personally or attack me personally or whatever. I guess like the follow-up question to that like ethically is like, so this is just like the step further. So I think that like answers the question about like how to handle this personally. Like I think that like I think that's true, what you're describing as far as like how to handle this like personally, probably the best. The ethical question I have beyond that is that like, so does that mean that we basically just like, for those people who engage in that kind of behavior, do we just write them off entirely, or is there like?
No, I mean like I still.
Yeah,
so I really don't like to say this publicly because I feel like I do embolden some of these heads. But even for the people that write the really, really toxic shit, I will still try to read through to see if they are making a point. Like a funny kind of example is like I got some email from some guy a while ago, and it was very, very toxic. He basically said that I was a fucking moron, that I was letting these uneducated dipshits dunk on me because I was too stupid to read anything about math, blah, blah, blah. And it was a really toxic email, and the guy phrased everything really toxic, but he brought up a lot of really good points. And now I have like really good responses when like pseudo philosophy majors try to bring up like Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or people talk about like, oh, set theory isn't proven, or whatever, because like the guy gave me good pointers and gave me places to look at, and I read up and I understand like a lot more about kind of like these fundamental structures of math or whatever. But it was like phrased in a really toxic way. So I don't like to say publicly like, oh, well, I'll still go through your feedback, because then people are like, oh, well, now I can just be a toxic head. I will generally still ban those people from my community, but it's still good if you can to go through the feedback. The way that I view this is like, I take kind of like a pretty egotistical look at this. You're kind of like in a battle with yourself here, and you have to figure out, because like there is value to be extracted from these people, and you're basically in a battle with yourself to figure out if you can overcome your own ego to extract the value there, even though the other person is trying really hard to make it so that they're worthless, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I guess that like in this term, because I mean, there's kind of two issues here, right? There's both the issue of trying to extract the criticism to be able to improve yourself, but there's also the issue where it's like if you're trying to reach the other person, because again, like I'm beginning from the position where it's like I'm trying to reach as many people as possible, or maybe where I guess it's like the issue of whether or not like the reason I focus on like reaching reasonable versus unreasonable people is I think fundamentally because it like because that's what's healthiest for me, and because it's like an achievable goal, right? Like I think that like like I think that I'm able to reach most reasonable people, or at least that's what I actively like work towards, right? That's usually like the goalpost that I set.
Sure.
I guess I just kind of worry because like usually, because by virtue of the fact that like there are some people who we just kind of like cut off, I'm just wondering if that means that like there's always going to be like some group of people, because it's like if you cut them off, they're going to go somewhere. It's not like, maybe I'll put it this way. The organization I used to work at in Tennessee was really interesting for me to work at in kind of like a philosophical way, because it was a homeless outreach organization, and the thing that was unique about there was that there was like that was essentially the last place where people could go to be able to receive any help, right? Like with most places, with most businesses or like organizations or whatever, if someone breaks a rule, if someone like if someone does something which goes against like the norms or whatever in that space, you can kick them out. You can be like, all right, you have to leave for a set time period or indefinitely, right? But there was a different, because it had like this difference where it was like, no, this is the last place where people could go. You couldn't really do that, right? And so I had to wrestle with like, okay, so what do you do with a space where even if someone like breaks a rule or tries to harm you, like there are people like I was working there when I was very early in transition. So there are people, you know, I'm not sure how many people have worked with people in poverty when you're like queer or LGBT or whatever. Like it's not like they're the kindest people, but like you have to be able to work with them because there's literally nowhere else where they can go. And so I'm wondering if there's kind of like a consideration similarly online, especially with politics, right? Because like the worst thing that I don't want to happen is for people who are terrible to like become more terrible, right? Or to get worse off, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I totally think that is not, that you don't want that to be your mission. I think that it's noble and even worthwhile to have the mission of like trying to make arguments that are appealing to as many people as possible. That doesn't mean that you have to become like the shelter for those people, though. Those are two vastly different mission statements, I think. Whereas like the former is doable and takes a lot of work, but the latter is like you're setting yourself up for like extreme, like, I mean, you said that this was for what, like homeless people or whatever? Yeah, I mean, if you've ever been involved in stuff related to that, or like people with mental illness, or like juvenile delinquent areas or whatever, like these people are going to be some of the most difficult to deal with. And it's like, that's like a full-time, like mental, emotional commitment to getting that done. Like, you can do that, but that's a lot. That's a really, really, really tall order. I wouldn't recommend it, because you're basically setting yourself up to have like one, these are going to be particular types of communities, and you're only going to have these people in these communities, right? You're not going to have like normal, like no offense, and it sounds to me to say, but normal, well-adjusted people don't want to spend time in those communities, right? Like, could you imagine like taking your friends or whatever to go like, oh, let's go hang out with all the people from my, you know, my community center of like last resort? They're gonna be like, no, I'm good. I don't want to like be around those types of people, right? Because it is really challenging.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're relegating your community to exclusively those types if that's what you set like your mission out to be, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I guess like that makes sense. That seems to be, because I mean, like, I do try to keep those people generally out of my, like, usually the way that I address those people is at this moment in time to not necessarily allow them in my community. Also because, like, I don't want it to be that, like, I'm endorsing or like acting complicitly if they are acting in a way that I would find like morally reprehensible, right? Like if there are people acting in my community who are like organizing and harassing other people, I don't want to be a part of that, or I don't want to be like, you know, in any way helping to make that happen. I guess it's just like, this is just like one of those questions that keeps me up at night, where it's like, because I know that there are some discords, like I think that there's like there's like a really big politics discord, right? Run by someone like Doobie. Yeah, I only know a little bit about the community, but as I've heard Doobie describe it, and I don't know this is true, I'm just going off of what they've said on panel before, is essentially that like there are a lot of people who are super far right in that community, but they'd rather have them under that roof to kind of hopefully try to move them over time. And I don't know if that works. I mean, like, you know, there are probably mixed results, but I mean, some people probably have like better accounts of that than others. It's just like, I don't know. It just feels weird to like basically look at some people and like write them off. But I could also see how that's basically necessary. Otherwise, you'd drive yourself crazy. So.
Yeah, it's just that's just a lot to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was helpful. I mean, right now.
Dealing with the amount, again, I've said this multiple times, I'll say it again, no human being is capable of dealing with the immense amount of negative feedback a streamer gets. Like celebrities don't see fans every single day, like movie stars don't do it, musicians don't do it. Like the level of engagement that you have and how like immersed you are in the culture of people that say things to you, the only thing that's even remotely comparable to this was the insane anti-fan culture that existed in South Korea for so many decades. And like that was considered to be crazy toxic at the time, but that's like the norm now for how we interact with people online. So
yeah, but I mean, like, it is interesting, just because I like now I'm at a point where I'm starting to get to know more and more public figures or people who do like social media content or things like that, right? And streamers are at this very interesting kind of intersection. Like there have been a couple times where I've even debated like stopping streaming and just focusing on like prepared content. But one of the main reasons I haven't is because like something that's unique about streaming, and I mean like I was talking about it as a negative, but I mean like there is positive to this, right? Like essentially being under like you will get the quickest and largest amount of feedback on something that you put out there, almost imaginable. Like you'll get almost instantaneous feedback from hundreds and hundreds of people on any thought or any work that you put out there. And so it does force you, I don't know, like let me describe this to you and you can tell me if you think that this is accurate. I think that there are a lot of people who have engaged with social media and who start out in a relatively small niche or start out as a relatively small content creator where they aren't under as much scrutiny because they are smaller or by virtue of their size or how well they're known. And so they have a lot more latitude with what they're able to do. Maybe some small mistakes that they're able to get away with. But then as they grow larger and larger and larger and they come under more and more scrutiny, a lot of people end up starting to distance themselves from social media, start checking out because they just get overwhelmed by the amount of criticism. Like it's just incomprehensible, the amount that they have to deal with. And a lot of it's probably going to be like, you know, not everyone is sitting down writing like a very thoughtful, well-articulated, you know, constructive feedback or comment or criticism, right? Like a lot of it's just like straight up hate because that's the internet. And so like and that's, you know, we're talking about not necessarily just streaming, like, you know, people like a lot of political, you know, Natalie is an example, but other people who do similar kinds of content, you know, video essays and whatnot. But then especially streamers, right? Where not only are you releasing videos, not only are you releasing them more frequently, but also whenever you're live, you can just have, you know, someone can just hop into a stream chat and just like type at you and suddenly, you know, if you're actually paying attention, some people may not pay attention to their stream chats, but if you're actually paying attention, then it's like you're getting feedback whenever someone decides to do that, right? And that can just be like so overwhelming for people to deal with, because I can imagine that the vast majority of people never, ever, ever have to like put their views under that much scrutiny.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Yeah, like imagine you're
so
having an
just-
argument with a stranger, and you're like, well, I kind of think this thing, and then that stranger's like, really? But remember that thing you said 2 years ago? Don't you think that's a like you? Yeah, like no, a normal human being never,
Oh, God.
ever is
Yeah.
thinking about this. Yeah.
I was having a conversation with someone recently, and I think that she actually put it in an interesting way. It's as if you're able to, like, as someone doing social media, or as someone doing streaming, or if you're on like Twitter, right? It's as if you're able. I know that some movies have played around with this concept. It's as if you're in a situation where you can like hear the thoughts of everyone around you, and you can hear what they're thinking about you, right?
Yeah.
Because most people operating online don't really have as much of a filter, or they have very little of a filter. So you can just kind of hear like, you know, very, very unfiltered, like all of the criticisms or all of the terrible things that people have to say about you. And it's just kind of like figuring out how to reconcile with not only like, you know, like figuring out how to reconcile with like in some way the more genuine thoughts of people, because, you know, like there's a lot of people, I imagine that you've observed this before, where it's like they'll say something incredibly mean or vitriolic in your stream chat, and then you bring them on to talk to you, and they're actually like, oh, by the way, I'm sorry I was so mean to you in the comments.
Yeah, this
I
happens
actually it's just like this
all the
very
time.
is very, very reasonable, right? Like people will be so duplicitous. Like they'll be like the nicest people ever when you talk to them. After like 5 minutes prior, they'll say like the meanest shit ever to you online, because that's a, you know, it's a lot easier to be a lot more forthcoming about what you actually believe when, you know, you have an anonymous name or pseudonym or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of figuring out like this is a very different way to experience criticism than what a lot of people are normally used to. And I think there's just like, it's just very hard for a lot of people to adjust. I don't know, I'm adjusting to this right now.
Good luck with everything. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, need any help with anything.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate it. All right, peace out. Bye.
Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed. Oh, really? What?
Add command URL amount 5 add message.
Oh,
wow, your music
no.
theory brain is so big, but your head is the proportional size.
Thank you.
Bonus meme, Pepe wins.